Hi guys, it's Katin Ong from Teammates, and today we'll be joined by Liv, and we're going to talk about sexuality and gender identity, especially kind of growing up in a school environment and what's that like.
I'm Liv. I'm 16 and currently in high school in year 11. And yeah, I've been out for a couple years, and I think that today we're going to be talking about my experience just being out and also what it's like growing up in a school environment like that.
I know a lot of people generally have like a basic idea of, you know,
Mm.
LGBTQ plus communities and things like that, but I think people don't know as much as they should about the gender spectrum, which can be kind of difficult if you're looking at it by yourself. It's a wide range and sometimes it can be confusing compared to different resources.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think that it's quite hard to figure out really the most concise and clear things because there's a thousand different things nowadays, and no one really knows what's the most correct to go off, and they're kind of scared with going off, even if they find research that seems sound and correct, and a lot of people agree with it, they don't want to really, go off it just in case it offends someone. So
Yeah,
yeah,
definitely.
I mean, with my experience in the community, and obviously I've talked to quite a few different people, I found that there's a general understanding that there's kind of three different things to do with identity, and you have your gender identity, you have your sexuality, and you have your physical, like biological sex.
Yeah.
So there's biological sex, which is male, female, intersex. If you don't know what intersex is, Google it. It's a bit of a long story. And then you've got your sexuality, which is gay, straight, bi, pan, etc. Um, and then you've got your actual gender identity. Now, a lot of people will say that gender identity is just male and female, and that matches with your biology. But nowadays, and honestly, throughout all of history, we've kind of understood that that's not really the case. You've got
Yeah.
actually more of a spectrum of gender. So you
Mhm.
kind of have masculine presenting people on one end, and then you've got feminine presenting people on the other end. And then some people, such as myself, kind of exist in sort of a gray area in the middle or completely off the spectrum, which is
Yeah.
really cool.
Yeah, I agree. What was it like for you kind of going through that, but also existing in a school environment where typically it's either you're one or the other, and where the default is always being a cis heterosexual person?
I think it was pretty tough. It was definitely tough, especially when you grow up in an environment where everything's very hush hush, like don't ask, don't tell.
Yeah.
I guess it was hard to really start getting away from one, the basics, everyone assuming that you were straight and also cis. And then after that, it was kind of figuring out what you were in a safe environment. And then,
Hmm.
obviously you're constantly told, because there's no one else around you who's like that, you're told that it's weird, or at least you have this sort of thought in your head growing up, whatever your parents have taught you, you kind of just believe. And that's the same for everyone else around you. If you have someone who's grown up with extremely conservative, sometimes religious parents, they really believe that these things can be harmful. And it's kind
Definitely.
of hard to grow up in an environment then where it's difficult for that to really understand who you are. But I think that I was lucky enough to have an environment where I wasn't the only person who was growing up like that. And also there was many different people around me who were there to support me, role models. I think the only thing I really wish that I could have had was probably people who weren't necessarily my age, maybe like 16 now when I was say 12 and 13, who
Yeah.
were growing up, who were healthy and positive role models who really taught you how to, I guess, exist in the social setting more than anything.
In the education system as well. I think there it has been a quite a significant improvement, which is good. But I definitely think in terms of things like what you're talking about, which is gender identity and role models, people to look up to and to talk to, that still needs to be there because
It's
you
so
can't have
important.
education without that, really.
Yeah, exactly. And people don't realize how hard it is for queer and non-cis students to grow up being the only source of information for the other 300 to a couple thousand kids around them. It's exhausting, you know? I don't want to be your walking dictionary when I'm already stressed out
Exactly.
being a teenager and I'm also in high school. Like, that's
Yeah.
ridiculous, you know? And then, as well as that, you then have to put yourself in a position of possible danger to be comfortable in a setting in school. Like, for example, I go to a single sex school, which is my identity as a non binary person is completely invalid all the time. Everything on the campus is referred to as she, her pronouns. And if we really think about it, that's going to have to be something that's looked at in the future, whether we want to continue single sex schooling and whether it's really so relevant in an age where gender is being deconstructed before our very eyes.
Another thing which I was curious about, and I know that it's a little bit of a gray area question, but just kind of, I
Mhm.
was talking to one of my friends and they mentioned that uh, they didn't know that a lot of their friends were part of the LGBTQ plus community. And as a result of that, when other classmates and even themselves made kind of not necessarily rude jokes, but just kind of jokes, um,
Mm.
they were perceived to those of the community as funny. And I guess you can make jokes, that are funny, of course, as one does. But I guess
Mm.
it's a little bit different if it can be perceived as kind of on the disrespectful end or the ignorant sort of end, especially coming from a cis or het person
Yeah.
to someone else. It's a little bit more difficult to gauge where that line is, if that makes sense. So I
Mm.
was wondering if you had, and not any advice, because really, if you think it's offensive, you probably shouldn't be saying it. Um,
Mm.
but kind of insight on like, oh,
How do you
navigate,
navigate this kind of
how
stuff?
do you
Yeah.
navigate, and how do you respond to that if someone says these things to you and maybe you don't feel 100% comfortable, or you don't,
Mm.
you think it's ignorant of them or disrespectful to them? How do you go about
I think that
that behavior?
I think that it's important if you're the person who's making the joke to really take a step back for a second before you speak and literally just because there's a fine line between dark humor and kind
Absolutely.
of making fun of a certain thing that someone does and then it being sexist or homophobic or ableist or just in general prejudiced and you don't even realize that it is until it's come out of your mouth and then the person
Oh,
who's someone who's your really good friend is cringing because that's my
yeah,
identity you're making fun of right there, that kind of thing. So
exactly.
for that, honestly, I would just say go out and educate yourself. We have an endless internet web. We have everything that we could possibly need right at our fingertips. It's not that hard. Just go out and Google the question that you want to know, watch a couple videos, or if you people who you have in your life who are in that community that you could be making fun of, just talk to them. Say, hey, I made that joke. I'm really sorry. I think it could have been offensive. What do you think?
Yeah.
And then go from there. And then if you are, say, the person on the other end who's receiving said joke, which, trust me, the amount of lesbians in the locker rooms jokes I've heard just bypassing by while I was in the locker room it's just people don't really realize how much of an effect it can have because these are the
And then
people
it
who
just
I've
becomes uncomfortable for
yeah
everyone involved.
people don't even realize because like I would like to think that everyone who's in my year, it's quite a small year that I have in my school, we're quite a tight knit group because we've been together for so long, we've all matured together, we've all become
Of
friends together,
course.
and yet knowing my identity and knowing who I am and knowing who I have been for the last 4 years pretty much openly,
Mm.
they still make these jokes. And even if they don't think I can hear them, I can. And it makes me really stop for a second and think, really? Like 4 years, dude. 4 years. Is
Yeah,
that is
yeah,
that what you're gonna throw it away with? That
yeah,
it's not even that funny. Like, come on,
yeah,
you
yeah.
know?
I understand. And it's also the thing where it's like you can't really, especially, now that we're in the senior portion of high school, scary,
Mm.
you can't have that excuse of I'm just a kid or I'm just young or I didn't know. It's
Oh, I
like
didn't know.
exactly. So maybe 7, 8, I get it. You're new to this, but I guess from then on, people really need to start like taking responsibility. It's okay to
Mm.
make mistakes as long as you go out and you correct them and you make sure that you try and you don't do those things again. And I guess it makes some people scared, especially people, people of color, the LGBTQ plus community, all sorts of people in marginalized groups. They don't like the fact that people who are our age and becoming young adults have the prospect of not undergoing that change, and they will grow up to become adults who have an influence on an even wider community outside of school,
Yeah.
which can have more detrimental effects than you could in high school. I mean, high school is pretty bad because you're all in the one
Yeah.
place, but like you're in the world now, like you're in university, you're in the workforce,
The
like
amount of people you can
who
affect
knows
with your
how many
opinions
people.
is just
Exactly, exactly.
And I think that my advice to any students who are on the other end of the jokes, I think that I'm fortunate enough that my school has a very, very strong anti-bullying policy, which
Love it.
means that none of the jokes really escalate to anything than occasional things that are said between friends that they don't think anyone else can hear, that kind of thing. But
Mm-hmm.
if you're really on the other end of jokes, which I have been in primary school, I grew up in an area where it really wasn't okay. Um, then I think that honestly the best thing to do is remind yourself that you're valid and surround yourself with people who are at the very least tolerant, if not accepting. I understand that. Obviously, I've never really been in a situation where I have faced jokes that are against people of color for obvious reasons. I'm not a person of color, and I've only experienced jokes of a certain type. Is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
So I can only handle what it would be like for those certain jokes. But I do know that the feeling is kind of universal when you receive those jokes. And I just know that you're valid and know that it does get better. And the older you get, the better it gets. And there's a reason why gay people don't peak in school. Okay?
And Liv, can I ask, like, how did you feel after you were able to come out and, fully accept and share your identity with others in the school and I guess outside of school as well? What was that like?
I think it was quite relieving to finally just be able to really be myself and not feel like I had to hide certain parts of myself. Just in general, just it felt a lot more comforting and just in general more freeing. But at the same time, it did cause quite a lot of anxiety because obviously most of the time, if I was telling someone this information about myself, it's quite personal. No
Mm,
one really said to your face that they didn't like that about you or that they didn't agree with it really. But they then would turn around to their friends and go like, "Oh," or like make a kind of a joke at some point
yeah.
or say something in the back of an English classroom or that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So on one hand, it was like, wow, this is great. I'm now me. Like I'm fully out to everyone, and it's great. I feel good about it. But on the other hand, it was like it kind of just upped the stress
Yeah.
level. And it's quite
I
it's a bit of a
understand.
it's a I was just lucky enough that the stress level was down here and the relief was up here. So
Yeah.
I was lucky enough that it was a good environment for me to come
Yeah.
out in. And I would say just wait up for who you are and it's best for you.
Now, what we have to do, and not only we, but just everyone has the responsibility to try and turn that kind of, oh, like what's that, into like a positive thing, into a stimulating discussion that you can have honestly, with people, because I think that's the main part. People just need to be more educated on this stuff.
Yeah. No, I agree, totally.
Well, thanks so much for your insight today. That was
Yeah, no
really
problem.
valuable. And thank you for being really honest and open with me. I know that
No, thank you for having
sometimes
me.
these things can be personal or they can be sensitive, and I'm really grateful for all of that. So thank you so much. And as always, you can find more details down description below, and I'll be sure to attach some links that you can use to do some further reading and contact details for both of us. Till next time, see you then.